Hello and welcome to the Community Links Dementia Hubs Tea Time Talks. Our first Tea Time talk is all about Alzheimer's. So today's Tea Time Teams talk is we're going to cover the basics of Alzheimer's disease. We will look at the diagnosis pathway and the progression of Alzheimer's. We'll look at the risk factors and genetics. We're going to cover medication and therapeutic interventions, but what today's sessions won't look at is individual circumstances. Those are best discussed with your dementia support coordinator, and we'll give you full contact details of your local service at the end of this session. So let's start off with what is dementia. So dementia is a syndrome. That's a group of related symptoms associated with an ongoing decline of brain functioning. That's the NHS Choices definition. Dementia is a progressive disorder that affects how your brain works, and in particular, the ability to remember, think, and reason. There are many different causes of dementia, and there are also many different types of dementia. And people often get confused about the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Alzheimer's is just one type of the different types of dementia. So one way to think about dementia is that it's an umbrella term for all the different types of dementia that exist underneath that. A bit like within mental health is the umbrella term, and underneath that there are different diagnoses such as depression, anxiety, psychosis. Within dementia, the umbrella term, you have the different diagnoses such as Alzheimer's, mixed dementia, vascular, frontotemporal. So what is Alzheimer's disease? So Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, and it's named after the doctor who first described it. During the course of the disease, proteins called amyloids build up in the brain to form structures called plaques and tangles. And this leads to the loss of connections between nerve cells and eventually to the death of nerve cells and loss of brain tissue. There are no current cures for Alzheimer's, but there may be medication options to help to temporarily reduce symptoms. And it's been shown that active lifestyle choices, including keeping physically active and keeping the brain stimulated through activities, have been found to be beneficial to slowing the rate of decline. So how is Alzheimer's different from dementia? Again, remember, dementia is the umbrella term. Alzheimer's is the most typically diagnosed of the over 100 different types of dementia. Alzheimer's disease accounts for around 60% of diagnosed dementias in the UK. The second most diagnosed type is vascular dementia, and that's where there are incidents relating to blood flow usually to the brain, that may cause strokes, mini strokes, and that's the cause of issues with cell death and cell problems in the brain. Alzheimer's disease is also the most prevalent form of dementia in younger people with dementia. And when we talk about younger people with dementia, we're talking about those people that are diagnosed before the age of 65. Really important to remember that dementia is not just a disease of older people. It can affect anybody at any time of life. So we've mentioned vascular dementia. And this is why I'm just going to talk a little bit here about mixed dementia, because mixed dementia is a condition in which a person has more than one type of dementia. So the most common type of these is Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia. So as we've just said, that's where you will have Alzheimer's disease, where you have those amyloids, those plaques and tangles in the brain, but you also have some issues with blood flow that might cause some strokes, mini strokes, clotting in the brain. The second most common type of mixed dementia is Alzheimer's and dementia with Lewy bodies. And at least 1 in every 10 people with dementia is diagnosed as having more than one type. Mixed dementia is much more common in older age groups, such as those over 75. And if you think about that, the most common type is Alzheimer's with vascular. As we get older, we're more prone to developing issues such as high blood pressure, problems with our arteries, that sort of thing. So it probably stands to reason that might be one of the reasons why. But it's possible to have more than 2 types of dementia within a mixed dementia diagnosis. So what are the risk factors for Alzheimer's? So biggest risk factor that we're aware of is age. Although we've said that Alzheimer's is not a disease of the old, and it can affect anybody at any age, there is evidence that as you get older, you are potentially more prone to developing a dementia. And as we said, Alzheimer's is the most common of the dementias. So it stands to reason that it may be that Alzheimer's is the one that you're diagnosed with if you end up with a dementia. Family history can be a risk factor, but we'll talk a little bit more about genetics. The issues around family history may relate more to things that we will talk about in a little bit in terms of other problems in terms of health. Down syndrome is a risk factor for Alzheimer's, so there is a higher risk of people with Down syndrome developing Alzheimer's. And when we talked about family history, cardiovascular disease, so smoking, obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, these have all been shown to be potential risk factors for developing Alzheimer's. So again, if you've got a family history of those, and especially if they are untreated, then they may be the things that are more linked to your risk of Alzheimer's than genetics, as we'll talk about in a bit. And head injuries. So again, not everybody that has a head injury will develop Alzheimer's, but there does seem to be a link between people that get severe head injuries or suffer a head trauma that may be linked to potentially developing Alzheimer's later on. So we'll talk about the diagnosis pathway. So the usual pathway to diagnosis is, first of all, talking to your GP. So your GP will take a history and will check for other conditions that you may have that may explain your symptoms. Some GPs may carry out a memory assessment, and it's becoming more common now that people that are already, say, in care homes, for example, that are in care homes for another reason, but may be suspected of having dementias, the GP may be the person that actually, or a associated person with the practice, may be the person that does the diagnosis at that stage. If they think it's possible that you have a dementia, they will refer you to the second part of the pathway, which is a memory assessment team or a specialist. And a specialist within that team will check your memory and ask additional questions. They may send you for scans, CT, MRI, PET. You may have had blood tests at this point for either the GP or from the memory team. Again, this is about ruling things out as much as it is about ruling things in. And the third stage is about diagnosis. So based on all those tests that the specialist has done, they will either rule out dementia, and this may include diagnosing another condition like mild cognitive impairment, MCI, or alcohol-related brain damage. The reason it's important that they rule other stuff out or give you those things, mild cognitive impairment or alcohol-related brain damage, those are potentially both treatable conditions rather than the progressive nature of dementia. So there are some mild cognitive impairments that may develop into dementia, but a lot of mild cognitive impairment is actually treatable. Or they will provide you with a diagnosis at that point. So once you're diagnosed, you may be prescribed medication to help with or to slow symptoms. The memory assessment team may keep you in touch with you as you adjust to any new medication, but once you have a diagnosis and are settled on medication, your ongoing care is passed over to your GP. So for some people, you may not need any medication at all because you may already be on the right sort of medication for your diagnosis. So you will be passed straight back to your GP, the same way as if any of us were referred by our GP to a consultant for any other physical issues, any mental health issues that we had around changes to medication. Once that was sorted out, it will go back to the GP for us to do. And the GP will usually offer or should offer you an annual review of your needs. That sometimes sits alongside or should sit alongside a carer review. So it's really important again that if you are a carer, you are making yourself known to your GP. In Bradford, Calderdale and Kirklees, you'll be offered a referral to the Dementia Hubs for post-diagnostic information, advice and signposting. So that's an opt-out system. So the memory assessment team will say at that point of diagnosis, would you like to be referred to the dementia support coordinators? And some people will say, actually, I think we've got the information we need, but we know how to get in touch. But the majority of people will say, yes, please, that's lovely. And again, the majority of our services will do a keep in touch type system as well to take the pressure off you, just to check and see how things are going, usually on an annual basis. In Leeds, you'll be initially offered a similar type referral to a memory support worker. So if we're talking about the progression of Alzheimer's, is usually viewed as a downward slope. In terms of normal aging, generally, if you talk about cognitive function on this side, time across the bottom, everybody experiences slight cognitive changes during aging. So that bit in terms of going back and checking your glasses case for where your glasses are, but and forgetting the fact that you're already wearing them. That sort of stuff, that's the day-to-day sort of everyday stuff that affects us all. When we're talking about the progression of Alzheimer's, it's more of a progressive downward slope, but how steep that slope is, or maybe for individuals, will be dependent on a number of factors. But it's important to recognize that it's usually a progressive slope, because if there are sudden drops in cognitive function, that would suggest that there's maybe something else that's going on, maybe an infection, maybe there's dehydration. So again, it's about recognizing that might be the time that you might want to call the GP or the NHS helpline. So it's just about being aware of what that progression potentially looks like. So again, when we're talking about the start of the stages of, and we'll talk about symptoms in a minute, but when we're talking about the start of Alzheimer's, that progression might be quite slow and we might not be seeing much. But then as Alzheimer's affects different parts of the brain, it might then start to become steeper. So the types of symptoms that people will see that might lead them to go get the diagnosis in the early stages, it tends to be in Alzheimer's memory lapses, such as forgetting about recent events or conversations or misplacing items. And again, it's not just one-off things, it's about these tending to happen on a more regular basis. For a lot of people, this is about things that they will recognize themselves, but there are some individuals that maybe aren't as aware, or maybe are in fear of what they think is happening to themselves, that might make it difficult to approach somebody about the diagnosis. There is evidence that people sometimes are aware that these changes are happening, but it takes around about a month before people feel comfortable or broach the subject, even with their closest relatives, let alone a professional. So that's the sort of anxieties that people can be holding in as they're worrying about the fact that they think that something is happening, but it could also then snowball into, I don't want to tell anybody. In the middle stages, the memory will get worse, but other symptoms may appear, and they can include what we call aphasia. So that's word finding issues. So that's problems around language. So it tends to be less around understanding other people's language. It tends to be around being able to pick the right word that we desperately want to say. There can be disorientation problems. So that's about people getting lost in places that they felt that they know, but they felt very, very comfortable in before. And again, that can be very, very unsettling for people. Changes in mood. Now, again, that's not always negative changes in mood, but it might be that somebody becomes a bit more weepy, but it might be that somebody who's usually being quite reserved suddenly becomes a lot more outgoing. We can get disturbed sleep. So again, we start to see a bit more change in sleep patterns, and that might have an effect on the household. And potentially, and again, not everybody, but there could be delusions or hallucinations. In the later stages, the symptoms progress, and they may also include movement problems, difficulty eating and swallowing, and significant short and long-term memory loss. But are everyone's progression and symptoms the same? No. Everyone's experience of Alzheimer's and their symptoms will be different due to their individual circumstances. So some of the factors, such as the time of life that you've been diagnosed, the healthier that you are, the support around you, can have impacts on the progression of your diagnosis. So what's actually happening in the brain as Alzheimer's progresses? So you've got a lovely picture of the brain here, just picking out some of the main areas. But as Alzheimer's progresses, more of the brain functioning can be affected. So when Alzheimer's first starts, it may be that those amyloid plaques are more contained in particular areas. So that's again more around the memory side of things. But as it moves and develops around the brain, you could see why it might potentially affect areas of the brain that affect sight and perception, for example. So that might be where your perception issues are. That might be why it becomes more difficult to reach out and hold on to to find the cup that you're reaching out for, or that colours start to blend into each other, or the wallpaper feels like it's shifting. The patterns on the wallpaper feel like they're shifting. Or those verbal issues that we're talking about in terms of aphasia, because it's moved to a different part of the brain and it's affecting different connections. In terms of genetics, so again, hugely important. Whenever I've done a big event such as memory walks or anything like this, you're always approached by family members who will say, my auntie had it, my dad had it, grandma. Does this mean that I'm going to develop Alzheimer's? So there are over 20 genetic variants that have been identified as risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. However, most of these only increase a person's risk of developing Alzheimer's very slightly. The most well-known risk variants for dementia are for Alzheimer's disease, and they're in the apolipoprotein E gene, which is more commonly known as APOE gene. Okay, 3 common variants of this gene ApoE2, ApoE3 and ApoE4. And of these, it's the ApoE4 that most increases a person's risk of developing dementia. But the ApoE variants do not directly cause dementia. You could have 2 copies of that ApoE4 but never develop dementia, but there are many people that do develop dementia but don't have any copies of the ApoE4 gene at all. And that's why testing for that ApoE, is not helpful in predicting whether or not someone will develop dementia. It's sometimes worth thinking more about that family history and what we can do in terms of reducing risk, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a bit, rather than just focusing back on those genetics. So when we talk about reducing risk, 6 things that we can do, and this is not just about reducing your risk of developing dementia, but also works around helping to support physical and mental health after diagnosis as well. So first one, get moving. Be as active as you can be. Now that might be that you're in the prime of your life and you're planning to go out and do your half marathon tomorrow. It might be that the most that you feel you're able to do is to do some gentle chair exercises, or even just grab hold of a stress ball and do some stuff with your hands today. That's whatever works for you in terms of getting moving. That's what you need to do. As I say, there's not a magic number of steps, a magic number. It's what works for you to keep you physically active. Second one is eat well. There is some evidence that the Mediterranean diet is really helpful. So again, oily foods, oily fish, lots of vegetables, all those things that we know we should be eating, rather than popping back into the fast food stuff that we know. But again, moderation. 3, quit smoking and cut down on alcohol. We know what that links back to, it reduces again that risk of those cardiovascular issues. And again, if you need help with any of those, first port of call is your GP, but most of your local councils will have smoking cessation and alcohol reduction support as well. Number 4, keep your mind active. So whatever you feel comfortable doing, whether it's a crossword, doing some knitting, listening to stuff on the radio, anything that just keeps your mind ticking over is beneficial. Number 5, and this is the one that particularly carers tend to neglect, look after your health. Check in with your GP. Make sure you've got a dentist. Make sure you're checking your hearing out. Make sure you're getting your eyesight checked out. Again, it's simple things like, things that as somebody's dementia progresses, there are things that we might believe are dementia related that could be just as easily related to the fact that they can no longer see as well or hear as well, but we will put it down because they've got this bigger diagnosis. And number 6, socialize. This doesn't mean if you've always been somebody who likes your own company that you suddenly have to get out there and join a group of 50 odd people. Socializing is about you keeping in touch with the people that you feel comfortable keeping in touch with. That might be online. That might be if you've always wanted to be around a group that share your love of bell rigging, that you get back into that or whatever. But it's about keeping connected to people. So we're going to talk a bit about treatments, and the treatments that we're going to talk around. We're going to tie these down into medications and in therapeutic interventions. So, as of today, no known cures for any of the identified dementias, but medication may be prescribed to slow progression and or relieve symptoms. So acetylcholinesterase inhibitors may be prescribed for certain types of dementia at the mild to moderate stages, including Alzheimer's. So memantine can be prescribed for certain dementias, and again, not everybody always tolerates these to start off with. So this is why, again, memory services may keep in touch with you to see if you're okay with side effects until you're comfortable with those. There's medication to reduce the risk of vascular events. So the medication we're talking about there are medication to reduce high blood pressure, blood thinners, those sort of things. And some medications can be prescribed for behavioural and psychological symptoms of dementia. So that tends to be called BPSD. So especially if coping strategies do not work. What we always do, if we're talking about professionals, but also carers wise, we always go down the route of coping strategies first. What's working, what's not working? Are there any potential, is there some triggers for this first before we go down the route of any medication route? And then you've got things like antidepressants that can be prescribed to treat underlying depression or anxiety. There are some new medications. There are 3 promising new medications that target amyloid plaques in Alzheimer's. All 3 drugs are immunotherapies, and all 3 trials show greatest benefits at the earliest stage of Alzheimer's. So that's again that mild to moderate stage. So the first one of these that came through trials was donanemab. It showed a 20% slowing in the speed of deterioration of memory and thinking, and 40% slowing in decline of everyday activities such as driving, doing hobbies, and managing finances. Lecanemab showed a decline in thinking and memory skills, was slowed by around about 27%, and it also slowed down the decline in quality of life by up to 56%. Both donanemab and lecanemab are delivered intravenously via a drip over the course of about an hour, and they may also involve regular PET scans. So again, it's about the infrastructure that would need to be involved, which is some of the stuff that the regulators would be looking at in terms of whether that these are viable, as well as the cost. The third is remternetug. That is currently going through its stage 3 trial at the moment. That's a different delivery system. It's a delivery via injection under the skin, and that stage 3 trial, as I say, it's still ongoing, but that's suggesting that it may have quicker and better results than donanemab. They have to go through the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority and NICE to get approval. The earliest they would the earliest expected date for those to come online will be 2024. And again, the issues they will be looking at will be cost, and that's a cost benefit over time, but also about how those could be presented and provided to people with and make sure that it wasn't just a postcode lottery again, that you had a situation whereby this area could provide them because they have the infrastructure, but this area couldn't. So those are the things that they will be looking at, and there will be usually along those, when the regulators get involved, there's a lot of haggling around cost and the wider implications around those as well. Other therapeutic interventions. So again, you may hear about some of these, but cognitive rehabilitation is working with a trained professional such as an occupational therapist and a relative or friend to achieve a personal goal, such as learning to use a mobile phone or other everyday tasks. So it works by getting you to use the parts of the brain that are working to help the parts that are not. So in the early stages of dementia, it can help cope better with the condition. Assistive technology, really quite useful. And again, a lot of you already probably have assistive technology in the home but don't realize it. As a starting point into assistive technology, it's worth taking a look at the Alzheimer's Society online shop. They have useful products such as mobile phones, house phones, and programmable medication dispensers. And they also have activity, music, and audio resources to support cognitive function. But in Calderdale and Kirklees, Gateway to Care is our adult social care. In Leeds, Bradford, it's adult social care. They can also help you with assistive technology such as fall detectors, which can be personal alarms, watches, necklaces that go around. When I said about you've probably already got it in the home, Alexa's Echoes can be great for setting reminders, and you can ask repetitive questions, get the same response each time. You can ask Alexa to open a laugh box and get access to a whole world of laughing. It's a great way to lift the mood. The other thing is, the earlier we use and we get somebody used to using assistive technology, potentially the easier it is for that to have been integrated as Alzheimer's develops. So if we get somebody used to using Alexa's, FaceTime, as all those other bits and pieces that can help keep people connected, you have reminders and stuff like that, the more they are used to that, rather than us introducing it as a problem develops, the easier it may be. Reminiscence and life story works. So again, music playlists can be very useful. We create more memory between the ages of 10 and 30, and music can play a highly significant role in recalling memories from this age. So you can create your own playlists, and I've given you a link there for playlists for dementia. But in all of your areas, you will have a dementia singing groups and singing for the brain type groups that are either dementia specific or dementia friendly. So come back to your Dementia Hub and just ask and see where your local groups are. Setting goals. The Alzheimer's Society also has a really good goal setting leaflet, but also find ways to share your story or express yourself in terms of life stories, recordings, journals. Now they might just be for just you and the family, but they can also be another way of actually reaching out and letting other people know about who you are. So there's the stuff that you've got on there for the Alzheimer's Society, again, about just journaling and stuff. But just to give you a local flavour, there is a link there to the Calderdale Dementia Hub website where you've got 2 people who have done videos about their personal stories. Cognitive stimulation therapy. So cognitive stimulation therapy, CST, involves taking part in group activities and exercises with other people with dementia, designed to improve memory, problem-solving skills, language ability, and evidence suggests that CST benefits people with mild to moderate dementia. So it may involve discussing the news, listening to music, word games, or mental arithmetic, or practical activities such as baking that involve measuring or following instructions. So there are major benefits in terms of people. What you're doing is you're enhancing the skills that people already have, and you are teaching new skills in a peer support environment. So the CST groups are groups of people with dementia with trained facilitators and volunteers, and they come together usually for either for 14 sessions, and that might be condensed, so it might be over 7 to 8 weeks, or it might be over the course of like 14 or plus weeks. And they are doing this work around enhancing what they've learned, enhancing what they're already doing, but they're also getting that peer support where they're actually getting to meet other people in similar situations to themselves. The evidence suggests that people that go through CST report that they have a better quality of life, but they also report better cognitive functioning and that they feel more able to cope. So Calderdale, Kirklees and Leeds Hub all offer free cognitive stimulation therapy. You just need to check the websites for the details. Calderdale and Kirklees also have maintenance CST available following the groups. So every single one of those free CST will also talk about, they won't just leave people hanging, they'll also talk about where people can move on to after that as well. So support from the hubs. So Bradford, Calderdale and Kirklees Dementia Hubs are here to support people throughout affected by dementia. So when we talk about people affected by dementia, we're talking about people with the diagnosis and carers, so family and friends, from point of diagnosis throughout their journey with dementia. We offer information, advice and signposting to empower and enhance your opportunities to live well. That's according to how you want to define what live well is. You tell us what you want, and then we find the ways, give you the information that you need to make those things happen. We work in partnership with local and national organisations to meet your needs and identify also gaps in service. So again, when we identify that there's needs, we won't always be the ones to fill those gaps, but we will make sure that those go back to people that have the power to do that. We also offer advice and information on the assessment pathway. So if people are worried about their memory, we'll give information and advice. What we're very clear on, though, is that, like we talked about with mild cognitive impairment, not everything that's, when people are worried about their memory, not everything that looks like a dementia turns into a diagnosis of dementia. There are things that look like dementias that are not progressive and dementias, and that are potentially treatable. And we do not want to pull people into a service that isn't the most appropriate service for them. Young Dementia Leeds provides day centre and community support to people with young onset dementia diagnosed before the age of 65 again, living in Leeds. I've put on here all our contact details. As I say, best way to keep yourself updated about all our different services is follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Yeah, we try and keep our websites as updated as regularly as we can do. There's our Young Dementia Leeds, and these are my details. So my name's Neil Cortman. I'm the service manager for Calderdale Dementia Hub. I hope you've enjoyed our brief talk all about Alzheimer's, which will be published on World Alzheimer's Day 2023. Keep an eye out for other tea time talks from the Dementia Hubs, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.